This is the Beginner Photography Podcast, and this week we are taking our cameras under the sea. So let's get into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to helping you grow your photography skills. Raymond interviews the world's top photographers in their field to ask questions that will get you taking better photos today. Now, with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodger fan, and Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Thank you so much for joining me today on the Beginner Photography Podcast. As always, I am your host and wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield, and I'm so excited to get into this interview. This interview is one that I haven't done before, and I think that you are really going to enjoy it. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about my week. It has been a crazy busy week because I've been trying to do a lot of things to plan out where the podcast is going to go, right? What do I want the podcast to be? For a long time, I was trying to do everything from, YouTube videos, blog posts, obviously podcast. I had an Alexa skill, business training within the Patreon, which the Patreon is still alive and well, but there's not the same videos that go into it every single week. And I'm doing this all by myself, and I got kind of burnt out. So I pulled back, and then I just started focusing just on the podcast episodes itself. Oh yeah, I'm also doing interviews and editing and creating show notes for the podcast. So I pulled back and I started just focusing on the interviews themselves, and I'm happy to where we are now. I like the format that we have, and we're going to definitely move forward with that. But I'm still thinking about where I want to take the podcast. How can I help as many people as possible? Because I know that you're listening to this podcast because you have a problem. Your problem is that you want to be a better photographer. And I want to be able to help facilitate you to get to where you are. So this week, I have been putting up a lot of resources for you, the listeners, and by creating a resource page on the website. So this resource page has things like recommended gear, recommended software, and even some free trainings that you can download. Now this is going to be the place to go where you need suggestions or recommendations. So if you haven't already, feel free to check out the new resource page by heading over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and then just click the resources tab right up at the top. That's all that you got to do. There's going to be a bunch of stuff there that you can take advantage of and enjoy right now. Now, as I said, I've been updating that. Now the next thing that is going to get updated on that resource page will be my newest mini course, which is called Picture Perfect Pricing. So if you have ever struggled or felt guilty for charging people money for your photography, for your work, then fear no more. I am going to break down not only how to get over that mindset that is really holding you back from actually earning an income with your camera, but I also show you exactly how to price your work with a custom-made, plug-and-play, easy-to-use spreadsheet with video tutorials on how to use it, and know for certain that what you charge is going to be enough, and it is going to be profitable for you. So you will be able to find out more about that by heading over to learn.beginnerphotographypodcast.com. So today's interview is a nice long interview, so I'm going to get into it real quick. But before we do that, I want to give a shout out. And this week's shout out is for Trent. Trent left a 5-star review on iTunes, and I want to share it with you because I truly do appreciate every single one of you who are listening. This lets me know that you are listening and that you are a real person, and that you picked up something from the podcast that is helpful, and I want to share that. So Trent says, "This is a fantastic podcast to get started and keep moving you forward. Raymond does an incredible job with the Beginner Photography Podcast. He pulls in professionals from all different areas of photography to discuss not only their career, but how they got started. All of this relates to the photographers wanting to grow and even start a business someday. Raymond himself, that's me, brings a wealth of experience as a wedding photographer. Check out his podcast if you are a photographer looking to get better." Trent, I appreciate you. That is a fantastic review. I'm so glad that talking to photographers and learning where they started really helps you on your journey. I know that it helps me on my journey. I don't know how everybody else got started, but I know how I got started. So when I hear, how other photographers got started, that gives me insights into, where could I be focusing more, and learning to grow my photography in a way to get to, wherever you want to be faster. So Trent, again, thank you so much for leaving a 5-star review on iTunes. Okay, so like I said, this is going to be a nice long interview. You are going to hear my daughter interrupt us, I believe twice, so get ready for that. But we're going to go ahead and get on into this interview right now with Nur, and she is an underwater photographer, and I think this interview is really going to open your eyes to what it takes to get the shot that you want. So let's get into it right now with Nur Tucker. Today's guest is Nur Tucker, an underwater photographer with decades of experience whose work truly has to be seen to be believed. Today, I am excited to chat about some of the challenges that shooting underwater presents. So Nur, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. Kind of like we just spoke about right before I press record, I've never interviewed an underwater photographer. I've worked with an underwater, or I guess a cinematographer who specialized in shooting underwater. But at the time I was also at work with him, so I wasn't able to really chat kind of about the challenges that being underwater with a very expensive piece of gear and trying to capture something with intention, kind of the challenges that presents. So I'm really excited to have this time free together to be able to get into this topic, because a lot of beginners obviously have questions. But first, before we get into all that, can you tell me and the listeners how you got your start in photography in the first place?
I think before photography, I started doing underwater photography even, which is a funny starting point. Year 1998, I was in Thailand on a holiday, Koh Samui, and I didn't really intend to do scuba diving at all, but there was a scuba diving course, a diving school at the resort. And I'm always open-minded. I said, look, I'm here for 2 weeks. Why don't I try this for a few days? And I enrolled. It was a PADI course, 2 days of, some classroom, whatever, reading the book at nighttime, and some pool sessions for the basic skills, and then 4 open water dives, which was the best part. And I still remember the first time ever I put the mask on and the BCD and all that, and I dived. The first time ever I looked down and I saw this vast blue, and I was so lucky there was a school of fish going at the same time under my feet. I still remember it. It just gives you goosebumps. It was this infinite blue with the school of fish under my feet, and I didn't know how deep that was. It looked like 1,000 meters. It wasn't, definitely, but I was seriously mesmerized. At that point, I said, I love this and I want to continue. So that was the diving bit. So I did my certificate there in Thailand, and then another holiday, it was Maldives this time. They were doing an advanced PADI, sorry, there is a phone calling. There was an advanced PADI certificate course, so I did that as well. When I was doing the course, the instructor brought a really Mickey Mouse camera to the course. Really? So we're doing the advanced version of the PADI course. He wanted to tell, probably, look, underwater you can even take photos, or either it was that, it was such a long time ago, I don't remember, or he wanted to say, look, you really need good buoyancy to be able to take photos. But it was a yellow, I think it was Motor Marine, I think so. You can even find them on eBay these days. So you put slides in it, so it's a film camera. It's like point and shoot, really Mickey Mouse, and there is one strobe on it, just on and off. So it's that simple. So I took some photos with it, and when I came on land and I saw there was fish, there was color, it was in focus, and I'm like, oh my God, this works. I was expecting everything to be murky, whatever. So there, 1998, I became interested in underwater photography. But obviously, when I thought, oh my God, I take these photos, they're amazing. When I look at them now, they're embarrassingly bad.
Oh, I understand that for sure.
Yeah, so that was the starting point. I really liked it. I can add further things to it. Basically, underwater is such an amazing world. Firstly, I thought maybe I was a fish in my previous life. I don't know. I love water so much. That's my go-to and safe place. I really feel happy when I'm underwater. The quiet, the tranquility, the pace of the animals or the fish swimming, like stingrays or the turtles, it always brings me tranquility. And I love that. And you don't think about any politics, any politicians, economics, inflation, none of that. Just it's completely pure tranquility, which I like that, and the quiet of that. You also have to accept as you dive more and more, you witness more of the underwater world, and you see what a big biodiversity is that, and the umbrella of the animals, the species you see underwater is breathtaking. For example, you can easily see minuscule things like microscopic things that you can only see with big diopters, magnifying lenses, such as like a smaller than a small ant, like a skeleton shrimp or a nudibranch. Or you see more than 10 meters, 10, 15 meters long, like whales, like the blue whale, for example, is massive. So such diverse stuff that you see is mesmerizing. And I think it's nice to witness that. And if you think about the 70%, even 71% of the earth is water, and the life started in the water a billion years before land, it's important. We have to know it. Not everybody knows what's going on underwater. And I think as you dive, take photos, you basically become an advocate for the water, for the animals. And obviously, you can also talk about the dangers that are presented to not only the sea life, the animals, the fish, the reefs, with the pollution, with the plastic, even the sun creams. I stopped using sun creams now because it can't really damage the reefs.
Really?
So
I did
anyways,
not know that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, all my dive buddies, they are big environmentalists. They like to preserve nature, animals. We care immensely about the underwater world. The last time I was traveling, I was in Philippines. One of my dive buddies, I was putting cream on my body, and she said, "Is that reef safe?" I felt so bad. I'm like, "Oh no, it's difficult to find it in England. No excuse." And then I didn't even use the sun cream after that.
Wow.
Because
Wow.
it can really damage. Anyways, in a nutshell, there is so much basically that makes you fall in love
Yeah, I
with
can
the
imagine
underwater photography. Yeah.
that being underwater, just being so removed from your normal everyday world that you see above land has to be an incredible experience, a very transformative experience. So I kind of want to go back to that moment where you got that first camera, you got those slides back. You kind of mentioned that diving was more of a holiday activity to you. At what point did you think, like, I can actually pursue this instead of I'm just going to do this every so often whenever we go on holiday?
Yeah, so when I came back from that trip, right away, it was Maldives, and I having used the Mickey Mouse camera, all of a sudden I become an expert. So I can't remember the name of the company, but there is in London, in Embankment, there is a company that sells a lot of underwater gear, not the cameras, but in one corner they have a camera set up as well. So I went there and I said, I want to buy a Nikonos. It was a Nikonos then. It was a specifically designed underwater camera. So I bought that. Again, it's worked with film, so E6. And I bought one, on and off strobe. It's either on or off. And I started shooting. So I went to Caribbean, I went to the Red Sea, and you used tubes back then just to frame the photo. It was completely primitive, but some of the photos, and I got better and better. But while I was there at that shop, I saw one ad. There is a workshop, Martin Edge. I still remember the person is called Martin Edge. He's an English photographer. Actually, it was the first person ever I went to workshops with. I contacted him, and he was really lovely, and he's still lovely. Anyways, I still see him. He's one of the very important people for underwater photography world. He had like 4 books published, I think, and I read all of them. So I contacted him and I said, look, I want to do some workshops. So I took my camera, I went to him, and we did some classroom sessions, about 4 hours, and then we went into the pool. We worked with some silk flowers, like those fake flowers they use at home. So we put some weights on them and we put them into the water, and basically he showed me all the initial techniques, which I would like to talk today actually for the beginners later on when the time comes. It's basically what you see is not what you take. Because when you take the photo of the silk flower, I could easily see the weight that we tied the, silk flower to, the stem, and then all the mosaic, the ugly mosaic of the pool behind, and then really badly exposed silk flower. So this is what you see. And then he taught me what to make out of it. So the next picture, obviously after I learned all the tricks, was negative space. You create a negative space, meaning I don't want to see the mosaic in the pool. I don't want to see that the weight ugly, weight. I just want to see a beautifully lit silk flower against a black background. Okay, how do we do that? So creating a negative space. So that was the first lesson, basically, I learned from him. So I did some that pool sessions, and then I did some trips with him as well. So I went to Red Sea, Maldives, a few different places with him. Every time you go on a workshop with similar-minded people, they are not just divers, they are not even divers, they are photographers, underwater photographers. That is so important. You can't just take photos while you're diving. You forget about diving. You dive solely to take photos. So if everybody's a photographer, it's excellent. But if you go on a diving trip with your camera, it doesn't work, and it never worked for me.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that a little bit. I want to know a little bit more about this workshop. When you went to the store and you bought that camera, you said that it was a film camera made for underwater.
Yes.
Is that what you brought to this workshop? And if so, was it just a point and shoot camera, or were there manual controls?
Actually, I'm trying to remember. I may have even had the wrong recollection. With Martin Edge, I had another camera, which was a Nikon, again, an analog, very old type film camera, but it was that which I brought. But in between, I went to another lady's, Linda Dunk. She was offering workshops. I went there with my Nikonos. Actually, it was so brand new, the whole packaging, I had to open it in front of her. I didn't know how to put it together. And she said, "Oh my God, what kind of people are on my trip?"
Yeah.
She said that apparently famously. And then I proved her wrong. A few days later, I had some really lovely photos with her teachings, and she was happy with what I did.
So I guess the question that I am trying to get at here is,
sorry,
did you already have an understanding of manual photography at this point, or was everything just point and shoot? And how did you learn? Where did your education for photography come from?
Yeah. That's a good question. Originally, when I started doing photography, it was point and shoot. And then gradually it started to evolve. It was again with Martin Edge. I learned all the basics about ISO, the shutter speed, the aperture priority, and all that. Obviously, it's a long experience. It takes time. You learn all these, but putting it in action and executing it, properly and efficiently when the time comes and quickly, it takes time. Now, obviously, I learned everything. So every time, I illuminate a photo, it is good, perfect, in terms of the lighting, in terms of the exposure, but it took a long time. It really took a long time.
So did you practice all of your photography underwater, or did you spend much time here on land to get a better understanding?
It was underwater. It was
underwater.
If you ask about the other stuff, which is for another thing later, equine is very, very recent, only in the last few years, basically. It was all underwater. I did everything underwater. The problem was, originally, I used to be a banker. So I used to be on trading floors and working long hours. I had 2 kids, and obviously you try to learn everything during 1 week of holiday that you have booked in a year. And then you go and you start learning not only the camera, but also the housing, the strobes, the whole thing. How did this work? I don't even remember. You start from scratch. You learn a lot during the week. And then when you come back, you throw the camera to one side, kids, work, etc. The pressures of the life gets in. And basically until the next year, you forget everything again. You start from scratch again. So it was a very, very slow learning curve for me. My photography really improved when I retired 5 years ago, because not only I could spend time on the photography, but I could dive more. Like I could do 4 or 5 trips a year.
Sure.
And obviously, don't forget, initially it was analog, but with the technology evolving to digital, my learning curve became exponential because the feedback is imminent, you know. Otherwise, you had 36 frames, take it. You don't even remember what settings you used when you took them. When you come back from the trip, you had them developed. Oh, tough luck. Just like it was the wrong settings, bad. And you don't even remember what settings. Now with the digital, it's imminent. You just take a photo, have a look at it. Oh, no, this is not good. I have to increase the shutter speed. I have to reduce this. ISO, definitely I have to reduce it. Or, you know, my strobes, I have to turn them down. It's just imminent. You can do fine. And now also it's not expensive. You can take 100 shots of the same little nudibranch, and then one of them will be great.
Yeah. You don't have to be limited to just the 36 shots and have to come out for air.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is.
So before we get too deep into the photography side into it, I kind of want to get a little bit more context of diving, and because you're underwater. Like, this is a potentially life and death scenario that you can find yourself in. So can you give me a quick safety lesson on diving?
Okay. Photographers are not very safe. Divers probably. No, that's a joke. But underwater photography is really difficult. Sometimes I say, after all these years, this is really difficult. Because you're not just a photographer. There are some branches of the photography which are not forgiving, and you really have to be a whiz in what you're doing in terms of technicalities, in terms of your exposure control, etc. But underwater, you have to be an excellent diver first. It is imperative. I can't really stress this enough. You have to be a very, very accomplished diver. But it doesn't mean that you have so many certificates and padding. You really have to have the man hours underwater and the experience, because the stability of yourself underwater is paramount to taking a stable shot, because you act like the tripod of your housing and camera, and they are heavy equipment. Yes, the water lifts a little bit, but at the end of the day, I will show you something. Just the camera is this big. This is only the camera. This is only the camera. It doesn't have the trims on it, like the strobes, the strobe arms, and the tripod, whatever. So it's quite heavy. Sometimes you need just one hand to use the whole thing, because maybe you use just one finger to stabilize yourself against the current. So underwater, obviously, your depth gauge is very important. Your nitrogen levels in your body is very important. How deep you are. Are you diving with air or nitrox? Depending on that, what kind of nitrox level or oxygen level you have in your tanks, dependent on that, your maximum depth varies. You have to know that. And you can easily be sidetracked with taking a photo. Sometimes it happens to me like, it needs a little bit more light under the chin. The light should come from up. Maybe I should, take the strobe arm a little bit to the side. Or I have a model, for example. I want the person model who is beaming a torch at me in between two big gorgonians. I tell him, go up a bit, go down a bit, go left a little bit. While I'm doing that, it happened once. I found myself at 37 meters, and I wasn't supposed to go lower than 33 for that particular dive, which was dangerous. So obviously you have to keep an eye on your depth gauge, on your oxygen levels, like what kind of how much air do I have left. You may finish at 30 meters, nothing is coming anymore, and if there is nobody around, it's quite dangerous. So I think you have to be looking after yourself, because most photographers will be looking after themselves. We say body systems are important, but as soon as we dive, normally we lose the body in the first 1 minute or so. So please look after your depth gauge, your computer, your air, and check these all the time, basically. And don't do a deco. We normally do no deco dives underwater. So you do maybe 3 minutes at 5 meters on the way back. We do normally 60-minute dives. We try not to do longer than that, but these are obviously this is for ourselves, but it is very important not to touch anything and respect the underwater. Photographers, while they are taking photos, they can become, not on purpose, but disrespectful to the environment. This involves touching the reefs, breaking the reefs, if you hold the reef, that part that you hold, it dies imminently.
I did not
Or
know
your
that.
fins, or you can, yeah, exactly. The minute you touch something, it dies. And sometimes certain reefs, it takes 100 years to form. It is a shame. So you should be respectful. Don't do the fin kicks. Don't kneel. Even if it's a mock diving, for example, that you do, which is just sand or volcanic sand in Indonesia. We go to Sulawesi. It's just black sand. But even then, we try not to touch the water. There could be something hidden under the sand, or we can also danger ourselves. We can touch supposed to be touching. There are so many tiny creatures that your eyes don't see, but we might be damaging. So exactly, we shouldn't touch anything.
Yes, I gotcha. Very recently, I believe it was just the other day, there was an article posted that there's a lavender field in France who, I guess, because of social media, became famous. People would come and take pictures in this beautiful lavender field, and then everybody knew where this place was. Droves and droves of photographers were coming to take photos in this field, and it has now ruined this farmer's business because of people trampling over just the lavender. And it's a very unfortunate situation. Now, lavender is not something that takes hundreds and hundreds of years to regrow.
Yeah.
So I would just imagine that feeling of protecting the
Yes.
environment that you're in has just got to be so much more powerful, for sure.
Yeah,
So
that's quite a similar situation, of course. Whether it
very
is
sad.
any reef scene, like some beautiful reefs, or even wrecks. Wrecks can be damaged. Like there are all these beautiful wrecks in the Red Sea, like Thistlegorm, for example, that was sunken during the World War, and it's amazing. It was carrying artillery to the war, and it still has all the four-wheel drives, the big trucks, the
Wow.
motorbikes, etc. inside. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I dived many times. I can't dive enough. I want to go again. But obviously, each year, thousands of tourists are visiting that. If everybody touches one little thing, it's just gonna damage basically the whole wreck.
Yes. You have a picture in I saw one of the photos on your website that it looked like a motorcycle attached to a ship underwater with a nice blue backlight
That
to it
must
with a
be it.
diver.
Okay,
Is that the
that must
same?
be it. Yes,
Wow.
yes,
Very
exactly. That
cool.
is Thistlegorm. Yes,
It
there is
looked
a diver in the back. Yeah.
that kind of brings me to my next question. For something like a wreck, you know what it is that you're getting into. You know that you want to go down there, and you have an idea of what it is that you want to see to capture that photo. But a lot of your photos are of the sea life. So before you go down, do you have an idea of the specific animals that you want to go out and shoot where you dive, or do you just go diving and then hope for the best?
Oh, I see. You're saying if it's a wreck, you know what you're shooting, but if it's just a wreck, if it's just you just dive. What I can say is the following. Obviously, this is nature. You don't know what you're gonna get. It's like, I don't know if you've ever done a safari in Africa.
Nope.
I've done maybe like 10, 15 times. So lots of different places in Africa. It's never the same. You may take the same route. Every single time is different. One day you see a leopard, the next day you see a stork, the other day is another bird or some aardvark, whatever. So knowing that this is nature, nothing is guaranteed. But what we do is we don't just take a camera and just go dive somewhere. We have a plan. Workshops are normally advertised for the category. For example, they say it's macro workshop, or super macro workshop, or it's a wide angle workshop, or it's a wreck photography workshop, or it could be sharks. For example, once I've done great hammerhead sharks in Bimini, Bahamas. The sole purpose of the trip is just to picture the great hammerheads in Bimini. They come there only for 2 weeks during the year. And there are feeders, shark feeders. They basically bait them. They put the chum and the whatever blood and all that, and we wait on the boat. Sometimes it takes 7 hours
Oh my
for the
goodness.
fins to arrive. Exactly. Sometimes 5 minutes. So for that one, you want a great hammerhead, which means you need a wide angle lens and the strobes accordingly. So you need longer arms, and everything is accordingly, the whole setup. But if you go to Sulawesi, Lembe, for example, in Indonesia, you know that you're going to do macro photography. So don't even bring your wide angle lens or dome with you, because you're not going to see anything bigger than probably this or that size. Or sometimes they can go so small, as I said, they're microscopic. You need some big magnifying lenses, and you do super macro because you really try to blow up a tiny shrimp maybe, or a nudibranch, whatever. So you know you have a plan on your mind what kind of creatures you want to take. But it is always the luck, of course. It's always the luck that basically you just have one lens. Even then, sorry. For example, let's assume you do macro photography, but still there are so many different lenses. For example, I have a 105 mm lens and I have a 60 mm lens. Obviously, 105 is tighter. So 105 I would use to take really small, minuscule stuff together with the diopter that I use. And diopter, I can put it outside the port. So I can screw it later on, like a +5, +10 sub-C diopter, just to magnify it further from the 105 mm lens. Let's assume I'm taking a little shrimp, or maybe tiny pygmy shrimps, like a 30 millimeter, something like this. Okay, so I do that. So I put a 105 mm lens, and all of a sudden, that is luck. You have a really big blurring octopus, which is very difficult to see. And it is not the right lens, and it happens. It always happens. You need the other lens, but once in a while, of course.
So in a situation like that, you're just out of luck. Is that it?
Yeah, of course. You're out of line. You improvise. Okay, you know what? I'm going to focus on the eyes of the octopus rather than the whole thing. Or why don't I just check the pattern of the beautiful pattern on the skin? So you can improvise, but it will not be the photo that you would normally shoot a situation. But there's always a plan. So these are the basic plans. But the other plans is we always have an idea of what kind of a image I want underwater. Okay, sometimes I say, you know what, I want to do a panning shot this time. So I want to put my shutter speed really low, like a quarter of a second, but a really high aperture number, like an f/22 or bigger. And obviously my strobes should be very, very strong. So I want to just pan a seahorse. Just it's as if the seahorse is on a run, or just to show some movement, some artistic elements. So then you just do your adjustments accordingly. Are you going to do a panning shot, or are you going to do a backlighting? Maybe I want to just do the silhouette of the seahorse. Then I don't want my strobes. I just want to do backlighting. Then you can just put a torch behind the seahorse. Then it is important that you take a torch with you.
Yeah, no, I would imagine.
This kind of, you can always plan, exactly.
So in a situation like that where you wanted to backlight a seahorse, you said bring a torch with you. Is this something where you can do both things yourself, where you can hold the torch and backlight the seahorse with the camera in another hand, or do you need an assistant?
I can do it myself, ideally, and some great photographers or some famous photographers, they afford to have, or they are lucky to have an assistant, lighting assistant, or a model for a wide angle shot. I don't have that luxury. What we do is, in terms of the macro photography, for example, I try to do everything myself. Believe me, sometimes I go down, I just think like I need a shopping bag. There are so many tools I need, like a tripod, or maybe some elastic bands to attach the torch to the tripod, or some other things. Maybe how many different torches I have. Some of them is a narrow beam, some of them is a wide angle beam, some of them is for the for the model, the tripod. And sometimes we use snoot just to eliminate the tiny things. So when you put a whole strobe on the animal, if it's tiny, then it will eliminate everything. But I want just that animal in the darkness against the black background. So you use a snoot just to eliminate, like this pen, just as the light beam coming onto the minuscule animal.
Yes.
That is really helpful if somebody holds it for you. That is really helpful, because it's so difficult. Because the minute you move it, that moves as well. Animal is moving. Sometimes the animal is actually on top of the, I'm sorry, the phone is just, the animal is sometimes on top of a moving thing. For example, a sea urchin, which is moving, on top of it, there is a little shrimp, for example, and I'm trying to light the shrimp. Shrimp is moving, the sea urchin is moving. underneath it,
The
and there
current
is
is
the
moving
current
it, yeah.
in the water as well. And then when I move the camera, every time I move it, the light is all over the place. Sometimes it's just a nightmare. So it would be very helpful if somebody helps you and put the light. What we do is sometimes once in a while, depending on how friendly your dive buddy is, you can help each other, saying, look, I can help you, and can you help me? Can we take turns?
Sure.
This happens with the backlighting as well. But I don't want to put it here. Sometimes you put the torch on the floor and then it rolls because the floor bed is not really straight. You put the torch perfectly, like eliminating the seahorse on the back. The minute you're trying to take the photo, it rolls. Oh, this is not good. You do it again, back and forth, exactly. Yeah.
So a few questions there. One of them is, how often do you use a tripod underwater, and in what sort of a situation would that come in handy?
Tripod, it varies. You don't have to have a tripod. If you can do it, sometimes it's very helpful. Let me tell you when you use a tripod. For example, if you want to do something artistic, let's assume I'm in a wreck and there is a diver in a very bright suit, yellow or red, and I want to take a rear curtain photo of the diver, which means I'm taking, it has to be on a very low shutter speed, let's assume, right? And I want the diver to have a movement effect in the shot.
Mm-hmm.
So I see the diver's face, but by the time the shot is taken, if the diver is swimming, the back is a bit blurred, as if there is movement effect, right? In order to get that right, I think tripod would be great because you're on such a low shutter speed. There's going to be movement or you will shake the camera. That would be helpful. But you can always try to rest it on something if it's available. You can find another little rock or I don't know, some other formation around.
Right.
You can use that. You can always put it on the seabed. You can do that. Or if the shutter speed is not that low, you can assume that the lifting power of the water will be okay. This is for wide angle. For macro, I try to basically perfect the backlighting sometimes. Look, if it's a seahorse, I can always rest the torch on the seabed, but let's assume I put the torch on the seabed, but the crab or the seahorse or the little shrimp that I'm trying to illuminate is here. Sometimes I can't find the angle just to illuminate the back. So it is really good to have a little one of those really cheap tripods. It's like this big on Amazon.
Yeah.
You just take it with you, and I can even just clip it on, basically, and then quickly attach the torch on top of the tripod. So you use that.
To keep it
the
there.
Torches, sometimes a backlighting, I do that. Or sometimes, for example, you may have seen it on my website. Sometimes you take these little gobies, yellow gobies in a beer bottle.
Oh, yes,
There are
yes.
lots of beer bottles or bottles, and they make them their home. The little tiny yellow gobies, they are normally a pair in a bottle. So if you want to give a special effect, like sometimes I want to put a red light just towards the bottle inside, so as if inside the bottle is illuminated red towards outside.
Mm-hmm.
And it's again just you can either put it on the side or use a tripod, little mini tripod. They're quite cute. I like that.
Yeah. So the use of the tripod is mostly for achieving a creative effect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's not essential. It's not essential, especially for beginners photography. It's really not essential.
Sure. So I know that when I go to shoot a wedding, which is primarily what I do, weddings and engagements, it's very easy for me because I know where I'm going, I know what is going to happen, and like we were talking about earlier, there's very little chance that I'm going to be in a life or death situation. So can you talk to me about kind of the planning that is involved in going that goes into your work? Because you mentioned there just a moment ago, sometimes you just want to bring a whole bag full of gear down there with you. Is that often the case, or do you go down there with a photo already in your head that you're going to try to get and then limit the amount of gear?
Of course, you always try to limit the amount of gear. That's for sure. What I do, the amount of gear mostly, in my experience, necessary was for macro or super macro diving, because you need that little tripod. Not everybody has to have it. Just that's me personally. I like that little tripod which goes on a clip somewhere, and then you have your torches, a few different torches, and then they are about this size, like my fist, some external diopters, magnifying diopters,
And these just
depending
go on
on
the
what
front
you
of the
see.
lens?
Yeah, I normally put them in my pockets. I have a lot of pockets on my wetsuit, and I have some external pockets. So the one diopter here, another diopter, depending on the size of the animal, they're about this size. That can go outside, so I can, screw them on top of the port. The torch or several torches, and some light effect, like some gel colors in front of the torches if I want to make a red light effect or a blue light effect, or sometimes you need a condenser for the torch, so it becomes a narrow beam light rather than illuminating everything. And the bigger part of these is the snoot, which is about this big, basically. This kind of thing. I have a retro snoot. It's quite bulky. And it clips on something. But I got used to having all these things. Sometimes we joke with friends. They say we're like a Christmas tree. Things are hanging from every part, torches and snoots and external strobes, tripods, whatever. So what you can do, if you are not going to use the snoot, maybe don't take the snoot with you. Sometimes you say, you know what, on this dive, I don't want the snoot. I'm just going to do maybe panning, or I'm going to do backlighting. Or some dives you just take the snoot and you just want to do snooting just so that you can use it, basically.
So how much would you say before you actually dive you are preparing for the shot?
First of all, before you all go on the trip, there are trips that sometimes it takes me 6 to 8 months to get ready.
Oh, wow.
Because there's so many. Oh yeah, actually there had been a mishap. I got ready for this trip in the Red Sea, and I had a problem with my health, and I couldn't even go. And it took me almost a year to get ready for that trip.
No.
Because you have something on your mind. That motorbike picture you saw, for example, I didn't think it was perfect. So I'm going to go there again to perfect it. I saw the mistakes there. I'm not going to tell you what they are. So I want to do certain, it's not even a mistake, but how can I improve this? I want a bigger angle in the light beam in the front. And I want an additional on there one. For example, I only had one external strobe there. Now I need another one. So I had to order another one. So I need some external flashlights that can come from right, from left, things like that, or the tripod, or you have to have your housing converted so it can accept the tripod underneath. And this has to go back and forth. Like, for example, my housing, which we can come to that later on, is an Austrian make. It had to go to Austria twice, and it's a heavy thing. It's like a 4 hour, just 4 kilos. Just the housing. Okay, can you please put a hole underneath so I can put a tripod to it? Can you please put a vacuum on it? Or So, or I want a bigger dome port. Can you convert it? Or you just need some external, just engineers. Can you just create this for me? Can you just make this for me? And there's a lot of thinking going on. And I also spend a lot of time in DIY shops, like the bathroom stores and things like that. There's a lot of. There are a lot of things, like you can just get an aluminum bathroom pipe, cut it, and just basically put it in front of the dome port just to create a certain effect. It's a constant. Or like some dishwashing scourers and things like that, just a background effect. I'm constantly experimenting.
I love it. That's the way that you learn and grow. That's so awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
So when it comes to the gear, obviously, let's just go ahead and get on into that now, because this is an entirely new world of specifically for me, because it's not just full frame versus crop, or having a fast or a slow lens, or this is entirely different. Now, while they make some incredibly weather sealed DSLRs these days, they're certainly not waterproof, especially down to a depth of 30 plus meters. So can you talk to me about the housing and how much control you have of the camera itself while you're underwater?
Okay. All right. I will show you again. I don't know if this angle is enough. I don't want to drop my dome port, so I don't know if this is a good angle. So this is basically...
It's very large.
The sun. Yeah, it's large, and this is only one part of it. What also makes it bulky and large and heavy is the strobes and the strobe arms. But I even have these are the strobes.
Oh, wow, even those are good size.
These are strobes.
We're
And
talking
then the
about something
arms,
that's about the size of like a small toaster oven that you're bringing underwater with you. This is not
and
very
these are
small.
like just the arms, obviously, that goes onto those. So the whole thing becomes quite bulky and awkward to carry
Yeah.
on land. Now, what I can say is the following. For a beginner, obviously I can't talk about iPhone photography or GoPro. GoPro, I hear a lot of people have them. Actually, you can even attach it on top of your housing for some small entertaining videos, and I can't talk about those. But what I can say is, for a beginner, it is really not essential to have the top of the range camera, and don't do it. Because first of all, you have to deserve the best camera. That's what I always say. But it is really not the camera. It's the person behind the camera and the right technique, but it's also the lens and the strobes, the strobe arms and the ports. So if you have a compact camera to start with, you can win competitions with that. There are a lot of amazing photographers that use a compact camera and win competitions. And these days, competitions always have a compact subcategory.
Oh, really?
So yeah, there is always a compact category, and sometimes it really annoys us because really great photographers that we know, they cheat and they go into the compact category. Right? Like, come on,
Ah,
you
that's
can't just do
shady.
this.
I see.
This is really not good. Anyways, but compact cameras for a starting point are great. Like Sony makes them. I can't tell you which models. Sony has them, and then Canon has them. What else?
I
There is
think
one
pretty
more.
much probably the most popular I would think is the GoPro.
Yeah, GoPros are good. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can do that. What is important as much as the camera is that the lens. So for a beginner, it is imperative that you have two lenses. One, you need a macro lens, probably a 60 mil kind of lens, and it is important that you have a wide angle like a fisheye lens. And we love Takina, for example, 10 to 17. So those are the go-to lenses for a beginner. And obviously, depending on the lens you use, you need the appropriate port. For a macro, you need a flat port. For the port that you have seen on the screen now is a wide angle one for
So
a
for
wide
those
angle
listening,
fisheye.
the port is the glass or the
Yes,
plastic in front of the
yes,
lens so that you can actually see it out.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, there is the thing, and then you just every time I will take it out and show it to you. So it's basic. This is the part. You see, that is the part. So this is the wide angle one, which is a medium size port, basically. They can come in bigger sizes, they can come in smaller sizes, and we can talk about the pros and cons later on.
It's basically
But I
like the
don't have.
biggest lens hood you can imagine. If you're just listening right now, it's like the biggest lens hood that you could possibly put on a camera, covered in. Is it glass or is it plastic?
This one is glass, but it can be acrylic as well, and it doesn't affect the optics. It really doesn't. What is important is the shape of it.
Yes.
So that was a wide angle one. And if you have a macro lens, like a 60 mil lens, then you need just a cylindrical thing that goes in with a flat port, basically. It's a flat port, that's what you call it. So you start with these two. If you're starting, get a compact camera, get a macro and a wide angle lens, and then the appropriate ports. But it is important, obviously, when you invest in the camera, ask whether there is a housing for it or not. Not every model, like for example, Sony or as I said, the other brands, they don't necessarily have the housing for it. So it's
Okay.
always important to go and ask which ones have housings. And it shouldn't have the touch screen because you should be able to,
You can't.
control it from outside. Yeah, exactly.
So how do you take control of the camera from outside? Are there buttons on the housing?
There is everything. To be honest, whatever you do with the camera, you can do underwater with the housing. Like this is the back of the housing, for example.
Oh yeah, tons of buttons.
But this is basically every single item here on the top, on the side,
Oh
or
my goodness.
these. They're all corresponding to something on the camera, and you have 100% control of your camera underwater. It's very easy. Once you know your camera, it's really no problem. And
Yeah.
you learn your housing as well. Yeah.
So how about the
It's no
dexterity
problem.
between like actually being underwater? I mean, are you using gloves, and the control is very intuitive to press those buttons? It's not too tough.
Gloves, most of the cases you're not allowed gloves because this is the sea culture. They don't want you to use gloves because if you use gloves, you're less careful, less respectful. You
Interesting.
touch things. You touch things. So gloves normally are not permitted, apart from like shark diving, like when I did Bimini, for example.
Oh yeah.
Gloves are necessary because tan color, this color is food.
Uh-huh.
So you have to cover yourself with black. So everything is like top to toe black. So we normally don't use gloves. Obviously, apart from cold water diving as well. When you're doing cold water diving, which I normally don't, like if you're diving in Norway or wherever, somewhere cold, you need gloves. You need a dry suit, you need gloves. And I heard that the dexterity goes down because you freeze.
Yeah.
And also with the thick glove, obviously using the buttons become a little bit cumbersome. I
Sure.
heard that, which I don't have much experience on. I like warm waters.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. I don't blame you. I remember growing up in California, we would go to the beach often, and everybody thinks that like California beaches, like they gotta be the best. Like you gotta go, the
No.
California summer or whatever. You dip your toes in that water, and you want to get out immediately because it's so cold.
It's cold, right?
It's
It's cold.
horrible.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
horrible. Um,
It's horrible.
I want to talk now a little bit kind of about the market for underwater photographers to sell prints. This is an area that I know nothing about. Is this something that I guess how
Yes.
big is the market for underwater photographers?
I don't know is the answer. And probably I'm not even the right person to answer because I really normally don't sell my underwater
Gotcha.
image online.
Gotcha.
I would only sell them, and actually, I'm planning to do some exhibitions next year, but something more artistic rather than just some fish, etc., which is a little bit premature. I normally don't sell my underwater images. I enter competitions. They are mostly competitions. It is a highly competitive market. I don't think it is easy to make money out of underwater images. There are so many good guys. Like, for example, I mentioned Martin Edge, and I haven't mentioned Alex Mustard, but he has been instrumental in improving my photography in the last 5, 6 years. I've done a lot of his workshops on lighting techniques, which is the most important thing underwater. So for example, to us, he's our god.
Yeah.
He is an amazing photographer. He's an amazing underwater photographer. He's a marine biologist. He's very knowledgeable, and his photos are like it's just we are
To die
hoping that
for.
always one day exactly
Of
we are
course.
trying to be him one day. He's amazing, and I am sure he's selling to magazines and some documentaries. I don't know what it is, the books, programs, and he does sell, but I don't think he's making millions out of it either. But it is very competitive unless you are as good as him, and he takes one photo to perfection with the amazing amount of pixels in it. Nothing is touched. For example, when you take the photo of a pygmy seahorse, it lives in some I think gorgonians or some coral reefs which have the perfect replica of his skin. It's an amazing camouflage. So it's basically polyps, but they are like little cut flowers, and then the seahorse looks like them. So it's difficult to pinpoint them, and you
Wow.
find them. They're tiny as well, 20, 30 millimeters, whatever. But when you're taking the photo and you are so close to it as well, in super macro, you are really close, almost touching distance, but not touching. You should not touch the polyps because then they all just go inside and it just kills the photo. Nobody will buy that then.
Yeah.
So it is difficult to achieve certain things in perfection, and the magazines can be very hard, basically. So I'm not the right person, I guess, to sell, but
Sure.
there are other people, yeah.
Well, you gave me a lot of great names there
Yeah,
to
yeah.
do a little bit more research.
Definitely, Alex Mustard is amazing. Martin H is really great, and there are a lot of good photographers.
Beautiful, beautiful. So let's talk a little bit more about kind of the, I guess, creative constraints that you may have. You talked about, being down there, seeing something and thinking, I got the wrong lens. What am I supposed to do in this situation? And then trying to figure that out. But what are some other things that that are just a byproduct of being underwater that constrain your creativity or your creative vision?
That's a good question. That is a very good question. This can always happen. The problem is I don't know whether it happened to me or not, because I'm thinking this is how I was thinking at the time. I don't know if it wasn't under that kind of depth or pressure or nitrogen level, would I have thought a bit better? You will never know that, but it is a known fact that when you're under pressure, every single time at a certain depth, let's assume 30 meters, 35 meters, your body's reaction is different.
So we're talking physical pressure here, not mental pressure, physical pressure.
No, I'm saying it affects the physical pressure affects the mental pressure.
Gotcha.
That's what I'm saying. So basically, when you are at a 30 meters or a 40 meters depth, everybody's reaction, and every single time is different, by the way, is different. And I think A, the pressure, B, the accumulated nitrogen in your body because of the pressure affects your mental capacity and your thinking speed. It can affect, it may not affect. As I said, every single time is different. Because of that, for example, when I did a deep dive course one day, they made me do some mental maths at 43 meters. They just bring a slate with you and they just give you some calculations, just how quickly can you do it. So they compare it above land, on land, and at 43 meters. At that occasion, it didn't affect me. It was some simple maths. It didn't affect me, but it can affect. Stress, I think, is important. If you are really stressed, and I get stressed a lot, sometimes I take it so seriously. I'm like, I have to create something. There must be some creativity. Already 40 minutes past, the dive is finishing, and I haven't done anything. Sometimes I stress myself, and it makes it worse. You should just be, relaxed and fine, okay, whatever. But I take it very seriously like this.
Okay, so then, how do you judge? What do you need to capture to call it a good day then?
First of all, you really want to maximize the probability by staying until the end of your allowed dive time. Normally it's a 60 minutes. A lot of people be noticed 70, 80 minutes. So it can increase, obviously, if you agreed beforehand with your bodies. You don't want to make them wait on the boat, wet and cold, etc.
Of course.
Let's assume 60 minutes your allowed time. You wouldn't get up at 30 minutes. Because why? Why do you do that? Because it's just a probability, and you never know. You may not see anything for 50 minutes. On the 60th minute, sometimes just the most amazing thing appears. It always happens. Sometimes just before you're about to surface at 5 meters, you see the most amazing creature. So you want to maximize the time to increase the probability of success or seeing something interesting, which I do, and just click away. Try to use other things. If one thing doesn't work, sometimes it happens, like sometimes I think my mind stopped. You just, for example, there's a seahorse. I know what to do with it. Okay, left writing, right writing. You just say, okay, I want to do backlighting. The strobes at 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock strobes, and this. You know how it works. And you use this f-stop, that shutter speed. It's not working. It's all washed out. And you try this, you try that, change the ISO. Nothing is working. Sometimes you go like, what's wrong? What's happening? Nothing I do is working.
I get that same feeling. That point,
it's like something is not working. What am I doing? And just take a minute. Just, okay, chill out. Just come back to it again. Or just say, you know what, for some reason this is not working. Let's try something else. Why don't I do panning instead, for example? Or it can happen. Or you do abstract. Nothing is working. Okay, abstract. I'm going to find some sea squirts and just do some backlighting and just do some abstract on those. You can always do something.
Of course. I don't know if you can hear her right there. She just walked in, so
lovely.
I apologize.
Hello.
Give me just
no,
one moment.
No worries. Lovely. Hello.
I apologize for that.
No worries.
We went camping a few weeks ago, and
they did very well, to be honest. They didn't bother you for a long time.
Yeah.
I think they did very well.
I bribed them with going outside and playing in the pool after we're done with the phone call. So
that's nice.
Yeah,
that's nice. Okay.
Okay, I got just a few last questions here for you. Now we talked a little bit about kind of using a compact camera. You don't need that top of the line gear to get started. So if somebody's just getting into underwater photography and they do go out and buy that compact camera, or they have a GoPro, Do you have any little tips for them to get the most out of to
Yeah.
get the best photos that they can?
Yes, of course. I think I will go back to my first ever lessons myself about what was important to learn in underwater photography. I am assuming these people already have the basic knowledge about, which I didn't have when I started, the ISO, shutter speed, aperture priority. I am actually not hearing you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
You
Yes.
hear me? Okay, fine. So I'm assuming they already know about the basics, aperture priority, shutter speed, ISO, sensitivity, etc. Having had that, and if they have the right lenses, do you remember I said and they need a 60mm and a wide angle, and they
Yes.
need proper strobes. If they have the strobes, proper strobes, manually operated strobes, they can actually do really well. In terms of the tips, the first thing to look at, which I learned, and I think it is instrumental, is creating a negative space, which means when you point and shoot to a fish, and you will see there is the fish, behind there is some rocks, some reef, some whatever, that maybe there is another fish, there is a big cacophony in the background.
Mm-hmm.
That could be a good textbook picture for identifying the species, but it will never be an artistic picture. Creating negative spaces separate that subject from the background somehow.
Mm-hmm.
It could be sometimes the subject against subject, you know, it could be like a little fish on a beautiful anemone, so it's just the anemone in the back. Or it could be just the black background, or completely blue background, like the blue of the sea, or something else. But just to create that negative space, they can look at a lot of magazine photos, maybe just to see some underwater dive magazines, diver magazines, just to see how that is achieved. That's important. The second important bit is we always say reduce the column of water. That basically means don't take it from a distance. Always go very, very near the subjects. Get close, get close. Even now, after all these years, I write in like how many S's I put close, get close, get close. I mean, like sometimes even I forget. You have to get as close as possible. And we always say many underwater pictures are taken from, many of those, or majority of the underwater photos are taken from very similar close distances, almost touching, like as if I'm touching this screen. Some of them are touching, some of them are, even the wreck photos, maybe you're only 2 meters, maybe you're 1 or 2 meters in front of the wreck. You can just see the whole wreck because it's a wide angle lens. Mm-hmm. So reduce the column of water, because water is not like air, and not every water is as clear as obviously air we see. So when you reduce the column of water, you increase the clarity of the picture, reduce the backscatter, the hanging things in the object, in the water. So that is important. Always get close. What else do we have? You always look up, because many beginner photographers, they will shoot like this, basically like that, just looking down. Because you are swimming or floating and the fish is underneath, you just shoot like that. That will never ever make a good picture. We always learn to look up, or just go at the eye level of the subject. For example, if it's a little blenny, then you have to get to the eye level, and then make sure to have an eye contact. Try to have an eye contact. If the blenny is looking that way, it will not make a good shot, basically. Or if you can only see one eye, again, that's not very good. We try to see both eyes, and we try to have eye contact, whether it's a seahorse, whether it's a blenny, or a goby. If it's looking like this, it's not gonna look very good, basically. So I think those are the ideas. Eye contact, look up, not down, reduce the column of water, and what was the other one? Get close to the subject.
Get close, of course. Those are great tips. I have the opportunity to go on a cruise this fall with my family down to Mexico, and I think
nice.
I'm going to give diving a shot. I've never done it before. I think that I'm willing to try it, and I think that after hearing these tips from you, I'm going to be better prepared to at least attempt to photograph something under there. So I appreciate you sharing those for sure.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah.
Can I add one thing? I think this is important. I sold my old housing to somebody, and he came back asking some questions to me, saying, "Look, why my photos are not, like this? Why are they all blown up? Why are they all cyany, not like the blues that you shoot?" And he said he's doing TTL mode. It is really important not to use the TTL mode of the camera. It
The
should be on the It should be on the
Oh,
manual
I see.
mode,
So no
because
automatic
yeah,
modes.
no TTL mode, because that really kills it. Because you want to be in whole control of the camera. You don't want to give the decision making of how powerful the strobes are going to be to your camera. TTL means through the lens. It's basically the camera decides depending on the light coming from the subject through the lens, and it just says, okay, this is how strong I'm going to make the strobes. And it may misunderstand. It doesn't have the idea what you're going to achieve or what is the plan that you want to see. So you want to be in control. Please, no TTL. That is my recommendation.
I love that. That's great. And that actually, what you just said there brings up one last question that I have for you before I let you go. I know that we've been talking far longer than I said that this would take. But whenever I look for, like, I have multiple GoPros, and whenever I look online for GoPro accessories, one of the big things is like a little dive housing for the GoPro, and it seems like the dome is always like a dark red color, and I never understood why that was, and yet I look at your dome and it's very clear. Do you have any insight
Yes.
as to why that is?
Your dome port is dark red color?
No, so like whenever I look online, so if you just search, I'm sure like GoPro dive
Uh-huh.
filters, they're always
Okay.
red.
Interest. Okay. Okay. I understand. I kind of understand. I am not sure, but this could be the reason. I may look into it and even get back to you later on. Are you taking without flash, the GoPro?
More than likely, yes, correct.
Ha, that is, I think, the reason. So what's happening is you're actually, without knowing, you're using a red filter. That's my understanding. We sometimes use magic filters. It's basic, they are red filters. What happens is when you do not use flash, I mean, actually, if I want to use a flash falls off very quickly,
Yes.
like 2-3 meters, and then it falls off very quickly. If you want to illuminate a wreck, which goes on 35, 40 meters or even 50 meters, flash is not going to work. Maybe just the front, and then it's not going to work. So for that kind of photography, we use magic filters called red filters. So you basically, behind your lens, you just put a red filter. It's called a magic filter. It basically, I think, helps the light to reach out to you more. So for longer. My understanding is light travels longer when you do that.
I see. That's very
I
interesting.
understand. Yes. So it is allowing you to take photos otherwise you couldn't have taken without strobes or at certain depths. For example, with a GoPro, if you're going to go to 20 meters depth, without that redness, probably it will struggle to find the light.
I'm pretty sure it can only go down to 10, but that's still a great tip for sure. And
Yeah.
something
I
that
don't know how many
obviously,
meters. I don't use GoPro.
yeah,
That could be an explanation,
yeah.
but I will look into it for you. I think that's but look up magic filters
I will.
and how they work.
Yeah.
Magic red filters underwater, how they work.
I
Yeah.
will. That's always been something that has interested me, and for some reason, I never ever once even considered to find out until I'm right here with you right now. So,
Yeah. How many meters you use? The 10 meters
the
you go with
GoPro,
that,
yeah, I believe
or,
it's only waterproof down to 10 meters, and then of course they have extra housings that I think at most totally taking a shot in the dark here, but I think it goes down to 25, 30 max. I think anything more than that, it just doesn't operate. It's really made for just like, being
I
in the
think
water.
that's the reason I would think of, because that's the only time when we use a red filter. Probably
Gotcha.
that's what's going on. I hope
All
that's
right.
the case.
Well, there you
I
go.
don't want my credibility to go down the drain here.
Well, yeah. No. Nor, I really want to thank you for coming on, sharing your extreme wealth of knowledge when it comes to taking underwater photography. I truly do appreciate you sharing as much as you did. For the listeners who want to know more about you, can you share where they can find and connect with you online?
Oh, great. Thank you so much. First of all, thanks for the opportunity. I really enjoyed this because the host is very friendly and
Oh,
I really
yes.
liked your questions. You ask very, very good questions. I'm really happy. Clearly, you're very knowledgeable about photography
Thank you.
yourselves and
Yes.
you can understand what the audience may be interested in. And it's important to basically pass on the knowledge of underwater to everybody because it's such a vast place and it would be nice to protect the oceans as well with this knowledge. Now, in terms of if anybody wants to follow up, I would be flattered. I have a website. It's called www.nurtucker.com, NURTUCKER.com. That's my website, and you can get in touch with me through my website, and you will see my underwater images, my equine images, which we didn't talk here today. You will see some exhibitions, some blog, etc. Otherwise, I'm on Instagram. It's at Nur Tucker Photography on Instagram. So these are the two places that you can get in touch with me. And if you have
Perfect.
any questions, I'm happy to follow up.
Awesome. Again, I will link to those in the show notes for sure. So if
Great.
anybody's listening, they could just swipe up and click a link and connect with you right away. But again, I have to thank you again so much for coming
No,
on and
thank you.
sharing
I
everything
really
that you did.
enjoyed this. Thank you. I enjoyed this.
First thing I gotta say is, Nur, if you are listening to this interview back and you're listening right now, I just have to say thank you so much for sharing all of the information that you did. It was truly eye-opening. You know, I don't think that a lot of people truly understand what goes into underwater photography. And, you know, I myself was a bit arrogant going into this, and or not arrogant, yeah, arrogant. I just didn't know what was all involved, and that was definitely my biggest takeaway was how much you need to prepare beforehand, before going out, because this is definitely a genre of photography that requires very much thinking and planning beforehand, because well, you don't have another option. You know, a few months ago in the Facebook group, it was either Michael or Jason who posted a video of an astronaut who was going out on a spacewalk, and he forgot to put in the memory card in his camera. You know, and you can't just go back inside the ship real quick and put it in and then go right back out. You know, this is something that requires a lot of planning. And what Nur taught me today was that planning ahead is what will bring you success. You know, and honestly, I think that's something that we can all bring into our respective styles of photography. So that is it for this week. I want to thank you again for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. I want to invite you to come back and join me next week. So until then, I want you to get out. I want you to keep shooting. I want you to stay safe. I want you to focus on yourself. And that's it. I love you all. Bye.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, please leave us a review in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. And continue the conversation with Raymond and other listeners of the podcast by joining the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group today. Thank you. We'll see you again next week.